Tobias?
C'est bon.
Okay, so welcome to this press conference from the Geneva Press Club in Geneva, and welcome to the speakers who are a little bit everywhere in the world, let's say in the North American continent. You are all welcome, and welcome also to the audience that is following us on our YouTube channel, on Facebook Live, and on our internet site, pressclub.ch. We are going to talk today about an important topic, pointing on the fisheries in the Bristol Bay area in Alaska, and the problems that improve the fishermen in front of the COVID-19. I won't tell much more. I will give now the floor to Mr. Ronald Barnes. Mr. Ronald Barnes, who is a member of the Indigenous People and Nation Coalition. So thank you very much. And Ronald Barnes, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Welcome to the press meeting. The 2020 salmon season in Bristol Bay, Alaska has brought new challenges to the governing authority of the tribal governments and communities in the Bristol Bay region in Southwest Alaska. At issue and in question is whether or not the tribal governments have authority and more authority so that they can make in the decision-making process with the governor of the state of Alaska and the federal government. The reason being is because the government has issued employee exemptions to many of the fishermen from the processors coming into Bristol Bay. And this has caused a challenge because of COVID-19 pandemic. And the concern is they will be able to come in freely because of these employee exemptions without proper quarantines and without proper curfew and other limitations that is expected of the tribal governments and the Bristol Bay Area Health Corporation, who is the CEO is Robert Clark from Dillingham, Alaska. As we move forward and we attempt to negotiate, we find ourselves, because of the work of the Indigenous Peoples and Nations Coalition, being given the authority to promote our international legal and political status. Alaska, being that it was a non-self-governing territory, in French you would say territoire non autonome. In 1946 it was listed and removed as what the international experts and professors has called irregular referendum of 1958. And because of this, the recommendations by Professor Alfred de Zayas, and also during the second Universal Periodic Review, which is a review of the human rights record of United States of America, it has recommended that Alaska be sent to the United Nations Decolonization Committee. What does this mean? It means that the traditional Indigenous governments and the tribal governments of Alaska have the right to self-determination and self-government. In fact, for the upcoming third cycle, the summary record report states that the Alaska and Hawaii, who were removed under General Assembly Resolution 1469 in 1959, it states that Alaska and Hawaii are asserting their right to self-determination and self-government. So we firmly believe that we have greater authority. The state and the federal government should not be creating law and policy where they believe they are above our heads and they can impose this or institute it without our consent. So first I will say to the world and the people, we continue to assert these rights under international law. We believe we have them, and we will continue to assert these rights. And because of these violations, we believe it is a crime against humanity, since the United States instituted law and policy based on doctrines of racial superiority in Supreme Court cases. The first being the 1823 Johnson v. McIntosh case, where they basically say that we have to adhere to the superior genius of the European civilization. And then the 1955 Tehiton case, where they outright and blatantly say the land is for the settlement of the white race in Alaska. And we are contesting their governing authority, and we believe we have the just and the right to say no to the United States of America and to the state, and that they should allow us sovereign equality in our negotiations on how we determine the law and policy for this upcoming season. So to give you some background, I'm going to give the floor to Robert Clark, the Chief Operating Officer of Bristol Bay Kanaknak Hospital, which is the only major hospital in Bristol Bay region.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, we've been working with the governor of the state of Alaska with not the full cooperation since March 11th. And our villages back in 1918-19 were totally decimated. The vast majority of our villages were just hit hard by the flu that was brought in, again by the fishermen, like we're afraid of having right now. And all our tribal governments, nation to nation to the government, asked that we be closed down. We've not had good receptivity from the federal government or the state. There's been, as of late, some late activities that show some promise, but they're not testing before they leave the continental United States up to Alaska and Anchorage, and when they come out to Bristol Bay, which would minimize risks. But even then, there's no guarantee that they aren't positive. So we're very, very worried. Bristol Bay is home to the world's largest fishery. And we get 10 to 15,000 or more people inundating us over a couple month period when we normally have 6,500 people. So we don't have the infrastructure. Our hospital's too small. We cannot take care of these large folks of people coming in. We need the high regulation, we need control, and we need the testing if it is to happen, because they're considered important infrastructure for the food industry. And they seem to disregard local tribal requests for more protection based on large losses of our ancestors up here in Alaska. So we've been contacting anybody and everybody that would listen to us, the Attorney General, the governor. We had Homeland Security come up and other folks, the top doc for the state, the head of public health nursing, and got some limited improvements, some improved testing and things like that. But it's like almost too little too late. And as of Monday, a big jet load of people came to Dillingham. And as of Tuesday, a big jet load came to King Salmon. And this whole week, we're starting to have these many, many people come in. And just Saturday, we had our first positive with a cannery worker. And to their credit, they tried to do the right things, but they did have it, which means false positives or false negatives are very scary and can happen. And our people are very, very worried. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. We appeal to the state, the United States government, UN, anybody to listen to us and try to add the appropriate corrections necessary to not have our people decimated. They are starting, we hear in Anchorage and Fairbanks, tests for people coming out to our areas, which is a positive sign, but they're not responding directly to our letters. And we're here on behalf of the tribes, the 28 tribes in Bristol Bay, which is the size of the state of Ohio, some 40,000 square mile area. But the Bristol Bay and Chignik fisheries could be heavily impacted negatively. And again, this is, I believe, part of what our story that we want to tell with people. And we're, of course, open to questions on anything that would come up. And we appreciate Ron Barnes, who was originally from here. His dad was my mentor when
Godfather.
we born. Yeah, godfather. Yeah, bet. So I really appreciate him keeping in touch with our people back home, and people like Marianne, you'll hear from later. These folks have been warriors for many years trying to right the wrongs and put us on a proper footing that we need and have the right venue. And I hope this effort is going to be helpful to get the attention of the governor to at least respond and maybe come out and talk to us rather than sending his underlings. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Robert. That gives you a brief of the situation as Robert is the Chief Operating Officer of Bristol Bay Area Health Corporation, seeing and attempting to negotiate on behalf of many tribal governments. We continue, and he will continue, both in Geneva and internationally and domestically, to address these inequalities. The next speaker is Jeffrey Stromer, Counselor for Bristol Bay Area Health Corporation from Hobbs, Strauss, Dean, and Walker.
Yes, hello everyone, and thank you for introducing me, Ronnie. I will just add a few points on to Robert's summary to kind of talk about some legal angles to the problem. One of the most significant problems, I think, is the fact that the governor has allowed other villages in Alaska to cut themselves off from outsiders and not allowed people to travel into those communities at the choice of those villages, because he has recognized in public statements that isolation for small tribal communities is one very effective way of preventing the coronavirus from being introduced in those small communities. But at the same time, he has not listened to the requests of the villages in the Bristol Bay region to isolate themselves, essentially putting fish over Alaska Natives' lives in the process. And that's fundamentally unfair and a violation of the villages in the Bristol Bay region's right to self-determine their own destiny and to protect the health of their own people. So the state has issued a number of health mandates that are targeted at reducing the impacts of the pandemic. But in doing so, as I just described, they've created two classes of remote tribal communities. One in which the state is supportive of them closing themselves off to the outside world, and others in the Bristol Bay region that are going to be faced in the upcoming weeks with an onslaught of people from the fishing industry not being able to make that choice. There are a number of organizations in the Bristol Bay region. Bristol Bay Area Health Corporation is one, Bristol Bay Native Association is another, and tribal communities throughout the region that have been working together to try to mitigate the impact of the coronavirus in the region. And virtually all of them have unanimously said that their preferred solution, despite the financial and economic impacts of the solution, is to close the fishery so that they don't find themselves having tens of thousands of people from the outside traveling from the lower 48, from hotspots, internationally from hotspots, coming in and working on the fishing boats and working in the fish processing plants. The inaction of the state in not responding to communications that have been sent to the Attorney General, to the Governor. Bristol Bay Area Health Corporation has also filed a complaint in the Alaska Human Rights Commission. All of those communications are still pending and none have been responded to, and the response really is inexcusable. They need to have more dialogue with all of the stakeholders in the Bristol Bay region, the people who live there, the people whose lives are being put at risk by the decision to open the fisheries at the expense of the smaller communities that really do not have the infrastructure, as Robert just said, to be able to handle a spread of the coronavirus in their communities. I think I'll stop there, Ronald, and turn it back to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Stromer. The next speaker we have is a video from Professor Alfred Desaias He is a professor of Geneva School of Diplomacy and International Relations, and he's formerly the independent expert on the promotion of a democratic and equitable international order. He did do a visit to Alaska and was scheduled to visit Dillingham, but due to the busy start of the season, he wasn't able to make it. But he did do a study in his report on self-determination, and in the conclusion of that report from his report to the General Assembly on self-determination stated that Alaska, Hawaii, and other cases such as Kashmir need to be sent to the United Nations Decolonization Committee. And of course, we appreciate Alfred because it was he, nearing the end of his mandate, who declared that there was apartheid in Alaska. And when we say apartheid, we mean that there's a disparity in the recognition and the level of governing authority, and that our peoples vested with the right to self-determination have this right to interact with sovereign equality with the United States of America and to develop law and policy so that we are equally protected and we can consent to any law or policy that is developed. So with that, we'll listen to Professor Alfred de Zayas.
It's muted.
At the Geneva School of Diplomacy. I am a former independent expert of the Human
Good
Rights
day,
Council
everybody.
on the
in
promotion of a
Geneva
democratic and equitable international order. We're addressing the crisis in Bristol Bay. We're addressing the obvious situation that the communities, the indigenous communities, the native Alaskans are unprepared to deal with the invasion of 10, 12, 15,000 fishermen who may be bringing COVID-19. With the invasion of 10, 12, 15,000 fishermen who may be bringing COVID-19 to the communities. We already know from experience that the indigenous communities of the United States, of Canada, of Alaska were devastated by smallpox and by the Spanish flu in 1918, et cetera, et cetera. And those who were not devastated were decimated through massacres and wars, et cetera. Now, today, 2020 May, what is the situation? Obviously, the sockeye salmon industry is important. It's economically very important. But this is also the main national natural resource fisheries for the indigenous population. The United States has an ontological obligation to protect the security, the life, and the health of all persons under its jurisdiction, including the indigenous of Bristol Bay. Now, our situation now, or rather the situation legally that obtains, is that the United States is bound by the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, especially Article 6 on the right to life, Article 9 on security of person, Article 26 on non-discrimination, Article 27 on the promotion of minority rights, and also most importantly, Article 1, which is the article on the right of self-determination and the sovereignty of the indigenous peoples for their natural resources. Now, quite concretely, we are seeing an increase of COVID-19 cases throughout the United States. It is a major crisis. We simply cannot assume it is business as usual. Of course, there will be economic losses if the fisheries are closed. Actually, it might be a good thing for the ecology. It might be a good thing for the recovery of the fishing stocks of salmon. But as the case may be, what is important is that the authorities listen to the Bristol Bay Area Health Corporation and to the Bristol Bay Native Association. thus far, Governor Delaney doesn't want to take that decision to protect the indigenous. It is simply not feasible at this stage to guarantee the safety of the indigenous. The only way to do so is to stop the incoming 10,000 fishermen who are coming into the area. Now, the United States has not ratified the Indigenous Peoples Convention, the ILO Convention 169. But Convention 169 of the International Labor Office is, I won't call it customary international law, but it is based on many other instruments of international law, including the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. So it is clear that this obligation that has been written into the 169 Convention to ensure the health of indigenous communities is also applicable mutatis mutandis to the United States. Also, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples obliges the United States and obliges all countries to provide health care for the population. Now, what is happening is that the indigenous have actually put in a official petition, an official complaint with the Human Rights Commission. Now, it is important that the Commission decide on an urgent basis this appeal by the indigenous and that action be taken. I would like to appeal to the Secretary General of the United Nations because it's the case of Bristol Bay is emblematic. It's one of many indigenous communities that are particularly threatened by COVID-19. If we succeed in protecting the population in Bristol Bay, maybe this will also have a trickle-down effect for the protection of other indigenous communities, take in North Dakota and South Dakota, and also in Canada. People sent to Canada is not the United States, but how about the communities in Wattawa? How about the communities in Thunder Bay? These people need protection, and this is proactive protection. And it's not just referring to an article in a convention, it is also the ontological function of a state. The state must protect the security and the health of every person under its jurisdiction, and that means also the indigenous of the United States and Canada. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, has already asked all countries to cooperate in the fight against COVID-19. Monday and Tuesday of this week, the 18th and the 19th, we had here in Geneva the 73rd World Health Assembly, in which the emphasis was put on international solidarity and on cooperation to fight this pandemic on an urgent basis and take all the necessary measures to address it. However, we should pause and consider that this problem goes back to the wrong priorities in the budgetary allocations of the United States Congress and of the Canadian government. Much too much money has been wasted for military expenditures. Much too little money has been expended in preparedness. So if we are facing a problem today, it is not a question of putting two band-aids and try to fix it now on a temporary basis. We have to change the paradigm. We have in the future to realize that health is a necessity. health is indispensable to the population. It is not a cost and it's not a luxury.
For giving us some insight on the international treaty obligations of the United States of America. Mentioning also the right to self-determination, the right to life, and other important aspects of the right to health, so that Indigenous people should be and need to be protected, not only in demanding this equality and deliberating with the United States government or its other political subdivisions, but also having the security in obtaining the necessary medical supplies and other infrastructure in order for us to deal with this influx of fishermen from the United States of America, hotspots and other areas. So the next person we have is, I don't know if he made it on, is Adolph Rowe. He's the chair of the Chilliwack Yup'ik Elders Council.
Emma Wispord, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, the floor is yours.
Oh no, I'm just a reporter on this call.
Oh, okay. I don't hear Adolph. Adolph, are you with us? Okay, we will move to Marianne Mills. She has been, as Robert has stated, one of our longtime activists and people who've supported the right to subsistence, the right to self-determination. She is a supporter from Kenaitze Tribal Government, the Kenaitze Tribal Council. She's been to Geneva and she's been to some of the treaty body meetings with myself and to the Human Rights Council advocating. So with that, I'll give the floor to Ms. Marianne Mills.
Thank you, Ron. I cannot hear you, but I could read lips pretty well. Yahale du ida ina shashida nikudichi shaiji katnutana yahanan esen yeshtu. My name is Marianne Mills, and my Denaina name is Nikudichi. I am a member of the Kenaitze Denaina tribe from the Kenai Peninsula in Alaska. The majority of tribal governments have signed a resolution calling for Alaska to be re-enlisted to the United Nations Decolonization Committee and to educate our peoples on our international rights to self-determination and self-government for our Indigenous peoples in Alaska. The COVID-19 pandemic heightens the critical demand that we exercise our right to self-determination and self-government to provide for health and security of our peoples. Historically, the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic saw an 80% reduction of our population as we were not prepared to defend ourselves against not only that virus, but other diseases that decimated our population in Alaska. We thank Alfred de Zayas for his visit to Alaska as an independent expert of Human Rights Council and his report and recommendation that Alaska be sent to the United Nations Decolonization Committee for review and re-enlistment. We also thank him for his memo declaring apartheid in Alaska due to the U.S. Supreme Court decision that the white race can take our territory in Alaska using doctrines of superiority to deny us our international status. As stated in an intervention to the Human Rights Council, the Indigenous peoples of Alaska are all human rights defenders, as current law and policy is not protecting us against abusive authority by the United States and the state of Alaska. We call upon the Human Rights Council and the special procedures to visit, report on, and to make recommendations to address the violations of the UN Charter and international law, including human rights law in Alaska. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marianne. Of course, we know that you have a lot of experience. You spent some time in jail, in and out of court, promoting and protecting our rights. And so thank you for all your many years of contribution to support raising the bar with the United States and its subdivisions, political subdivisions. Okay, as Adolf Roll is not online, he did not get to speak. He basically is stating that the elders fully support the initiative to gain complete recognition of our international status, and that the indigenous peoples and residents of Alaska are fully protected against abuses. When he talked to me, he said he was a witness of and on the executive committee of Alaska Intertribal Council when AIT Resolution 205-10 gave full recognition and gave authority to IPNC to pursue this international status. And he calls on the world not to rubber stamp initiatives that offer cosmetic protection. And he says that this only denies our peoples of substantive and concrete protection against abuses. So he also thanks Marianne, he thanks myself for our international work. And as for the Indigenous Peoples and Nations Coalition, we believe that the lack of recognition and respect, as the international experts said and relayed to me as appointed ambassador from Alaska, to pursue the dignity and respect that we deserve and to be unrelentless. And with that, we have the right to simply say no to the state of Alaska and to United States in their unilateral decision-making. And as such, we declare that there's a malfeasance of office, there's a misfeasance of office, non-feasance of office, and acts of omission which constitute crimes against humanity. And if it destroys in whole or in part our indigenous peoples without the needed protection that we still do not yet have, we still do not have testing and tracing, we still do not have proper bedding, and all of the other necessary equipment to fight against a possible influx into our region and to protect us against this influx of people that may infect us with the virus. So with that, I will give back to Mr. Reuchi, and then he can call on the international press so they can pose questions to us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barnes. Thank you, all of the speakers. So we can go to the questions if there are any. Please, there is on the lower right side of your computer screen, in the participants part of it, you can raise your hands. So if any reporter in this virtual room has a question, please just raise your hands and I will open your mics. Any questions? Perhaps if I can, I would start myself with a question. And if I understand, Mr. Robert Clark is on the spot in the Bristol Bay area, right, Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Can you hear us? Okay. I would be interested to have some more details, factual details. First, how many people live today in this area, and how many do you expect to come in as fishermen? You're talking about 15,000, I guess. So can you just sketch us when also these people should arrive in the area, in what delays, and just give us a few figures of this situation, please.
Yeah, we have roughly 6,500 year-round population, the majority of which are Alaska Native. There's roughly 1,500 non-natives in our region that are domiciled. In the summer, we get upwards to 15,000 fishermen and cannery workers. Today, most of the cannery workers come from the lower 48, Europe, and Africa. Many are in hotspot areas, which worries us. And at least 2 canneries have had positive cases, so Cordova and Dillingham. And we're anticipating there'll probably be more. We now have several jet loads of people coming in and small charters because we did not have commercial air carriers coming to Bristol Bay, namely Dillingham and King Salmon, the 2 biggest areas that have fishing. The other area that has a lot of fishing in our region is the Chignik Bay, which is on the Pacific side. We're on the Arctic side of the Alaska Peninsula. And Bristol Bay has the most prolific sockeye salmon runs in the world. So our 30-some villages, of which we have 21 small clinics and 28 tribes that we work with, have not want the people to come in and write out the year. It appears that because they're considered essential workers by the president and by our governor, that we don't have a whole lot of say. So the other process is protection. We wanted testing in the lower 48 before they come to Alaska, then stop in Anchorage and again be tested and quarantined before they come to Dillingham and King Salmon, and then be quarantined here. We had little or no PPEs and effects to really take care of it. You only have 16 beds, 12 of which are set up for this type of problem. The other beds are for birthing and other uses. So we
16, you said, excuse me, 16 or 60?
16, 16.
16.
Yeah.
And how many ventilators do you have in your area?
How many what?
Ventilators.
Ventilators, only 2. And it's hard to get parts because when they built what we consider our new hospital, replacing the 1941 hospital, was built in '86, and it's hard to get supplies, particularly ventilators. We do have oxygen in all our rooms. We have about a dozen doctors and various nurses and stuff like that, but we are not ICU. We don't have the type of treatment that are necessary. We have to fly them into Anchorage, and it's very expensive. It's 400 miles away. We don't have roads. We're very isolated. So now we're being inundated and have been with the smaller planes bringing in 9 people at a time. And now we have the big jet coming in, bringing in a whole bunch of people. So we're trying to have them all tested. We're trying to have them quarantined. We don't have adequate security or police protection or trooper protection to ensure they're in compliance and staying home. The 6 feet distancing, the masks, all that stuff there. These people are little rebels. They're up here to make their killing fishing and making a bunch of money. And it freaks out our people locally who want to simply live. And yes, we are fishermen. We're the people of the salmon here. But life is more important than money for us. And we can subsist. We can hunt off the land and make a living of it. It might be sparse, but we've done it. And that's what we want this year. But we're not getting the full cooperation of the federal government and the state of Alaska, more importantly, who somewhat is starting to listen to us a little more in consultation, but really not enough. No real good self-determination. We have more with the Indian Health Service and the federal government, but not enough. But it's a start. And to their credit, they're trying to help, but again, too late. They should have done it earlier. You don't do it on the back end and try to mop up a bad situation. You try to prevent the situation from happening early on and have a good gatekeeping process that is evolving through our various governments, but it's not really where it's at. So my board is still standing firm. We don't want fishing because of the high risk.
Okay. Tell me one thing. When will your area be full with the fishermen? I mean, it starts in summer, you say, but some people have arrived already. But when do you expect everybody to be here? So And what degrees of urgency is it right now to stop the influx of people?
The main fishing begins in June. It's pretty much over by the end of July. So they are showing up to get the boats ready, to get the canneries ready for production, and get the nets and everything ready so that when they go out, they could catch the fish. The independent fishermen have to have a cannery, and the cannery buys the fish and processes the fish and sells the fish internationally and nationally for people that love wild salmon. We don't have the farm salmon. So it's the last main big area where you have wild salmon. And we're blessed in Alaska in many areas, but Bristol Bay seems to have the most with our 5 river systems over other areas that do very well, but don't have as much. And a lot of Alaska coastline, there's fisheries from Southeast Alaska, which is right butting up against Canada, all the way up to the Arctic.
In the canneries and also on the fishing boats, is it possible to respect the usual measures that are asked for, like social distance of 3 feet, like the mask? What's about? Is this any way of managing the situation?
I've been fishing since 1955, and I can say in the 32-foot boat, when you got 2 people, maybe you could get 6 feet apart. But with the 4 to 6 to 10 people today, it's impossible. I don't know how you're going to fish with a mask on. I don't know how you're going to do the distancing. You cannot do that. The canneries are practically elbow to elbow, and they're trying to do the distancing. They're trying to cut back and make it more usable based on bad experience in the poultry and the pork and beef industry in lower 48, many of which had to close down because of the issues. It's cold, it's damp, it's ripe for flu and other types of problems like that. And there's long hours. So it's a very, very difficult environment to work in. And to the credit of the processors, they're trying their best, but we don't have good controls. And we don't have enough big fines or something to close them down, which maybe people might listen to without following the main rules. You have to have some inducements. Why have speed limits if people follow the speed limit? That's why they get the tickets and lose their ability to drive. Well, maybe the same thing in the fishing. If they're not going to follow the rules, then they ought to be out of here. If they follow them, fine. If everything was done correctly as we had hoped it would be, then that's a better, less risk situation. But right now, people are very, very worried, and it affects your mental, social health, and physical health. And when you don't have the infrastructure, the people, the resources in place to take care of it, the only place is sending them to Anchorage or sending them back home, wherever they're at, to really take care of it. We're trying to get improvised things, tents to take care of people, overflow situations, because we don't have the beds. We're renting places in town and getting some grants from the government. We're getting testing machines. But again, why weren't they here earlier? Why weren't they doing that rather than after the fact now, where people are saying, well, I told you so, and now we're from worried to maybe hysteria starting.
Is there any question from the floor? Any question from the reporters that are here? If not, I just want to ask one more question to Mr. Stromer on a legal point. Can you hear me, Mr. Stromer?
Yes, I can.
Okay. What you are asking the fishermen not to come and respect the rights, the human rights of the local tribal people in this place of Alaska, to whom have you addressed? To the local government, to the state government, to the federal government, to all of them? And from where do you expect a quick answer today?
So virtually all of the tribal communities in the region have themselves enacted resolutions closing their communities to outsiders. So that's the first layer. The problem with federal Indian law and policy in Alaska is that tribes, other than one tribe that's in the southern part of the state, do not have territorial jurisdiction because there are no reservations and the land does not belong to them in other parts of the state. So they have the ability to enact resolutions and make governmental decisions that impact their own tribal members, but their ability to make those decisions and have those decisions impact non-tribal members does not exist. The state and the federal governments have the ability to do that. So the effort has been to try to get the state to recognize the tribe's decisions to close off their communities and isolate themselves. And as you heard Robert say, and I said earlier, the states and the federal governments have not recognized that the villages have the right to do that. But in the state in particular's situation, what creates a unique dynamic is that the governor has, in other parts of the state, accepted tribal decisions to close their communities. But in the Bristol Bay region, because of the fishery, he has not accepted those decisions. So he has essentially created two separate classes of tribes in the state and is discriminating, in my view, against the villages in the Bristol Bay region by not allowing them to make the decisions in their region that he's allowing other villages in other parts of the state to make to close themselves off. So what we have done is filed a complaint in the Alaska Human Rights Commission. It is a state human rights commission, and we have alleged in the complaint that the governor's policies are discriminating between different tribal governments in the state. Right now, that's kind of the one legal mechanism that we've triggered. There is also the possibility of going to state court and federal court, but so far, Bristol Bay Area Health Corporation and the villages have decided not to do that. So we're right now looking at the Alaska Human Rights Commission to take the necessary steps.
Okay, thank you very much. And one more thing, are you addressing a complaint or a resolution to a body, a UN body in Geneva? And can you be more precise? If yes, can you be more precise about that?
Here's what we're doing. This is Ambassador Barnes. Let me give another side of this, because this is why Marianne Mills and I are important. When we did civil resistance dating back to the late 80s and in 1992, then President George Bush, the father Bush, ordered them not to arrest us. And we just said straight to them, you do not have authority. We are invoking Article 73 in our international status. And we sent it to international, the United Nations Secretary General and everyone else. They are afraid to take up in court this right to self-determination that exists in all of us, our Alaska Indigenous peoples. I'm in exile for 16 years. Bern has ordered the Canton of Geneva to grant me protective status. When I walk into the stores, I can see, from where Marianne is from, Kenai red salmon, premium red salmon, and I can walk into dinners and I can see Alaska red salmon, and you can do the same. And you can taste the difference between this prime, exceptionally tasting salmon from Bristol Bay, which has all the species of salmon, and it's wild stock. And our status, we do not accept this federal Indian law. As I stated, those two cases, they base plenary powers over us based on doctrines of superiority, which under Article 73, when they were developing this, the Secretary of State at the time stated that that is illegal. And then also that it's for the settlement of the white race. How blatant is that? When we lobby states now, they are saying, yes, this is apartheid. We were offered a resolution in 1999 by the former Subcommission on Human Rights, and we wanted to do one later, but United States and Great Britain opted to diminish the capacity of the Subcommission on Human Rights to do a resolution as such. So now we stand and sit here today with an international status. One of the reasons they know that if someone like me went back to organize and we organize nonviolent, peaceful civil resistance, they know that they have no right because we have put them on notice that they cannot enforce a violation of the Constitution of the United States of America. Federal Indian law does not apply in Alaska. We have every right to resist it. And what they hold and they use as a matter of extortion against the entities in Bristol Bay and throughout Alaska, because they take our resource, which I stated in another interview is more than $1 trillion. The resource that they take from us, we could do everything to not only fund ourselves, but also to provide better health care and to provide better infrastructure. So I take exception when I hear the use of federal Indian law in Alaska, because it is discriminating and it is apartheid. I did see someone raise their hand for a question. I don't know if you caught that.
Yeah, that was me. This is Emma Whitford. I'm a reporter with Law 360. I had a quick question for Dr. Clark. First, simply, have there been any documented cases among the 28 tribes in your jurisdiction yet?
Any what? You said violence?
No, any cases, any documented COVID-19 cases?
I just got a call from my incident commander, our chief nurse. We're going to have to charter down a team with testing machines. There's a positive case in the Chignik area. There was a funeral and a death down there, and a number of people were in close contact. And one we believe is positive for sure. And we're afraid that possibly a doc and some of our health aides may be converting over. So in addition to Dillingham, in addition to Cordova, among the fishing communities, it's starting to come, and this is the start of a lot of hysteria of people being very, very concerned. So we had to go to Good News Bay also because the person came in from Bethel and was around and in close contact with a positive case over there. So it's starting, and it's not what we want, but we're lucky we can test. We got the rapid Abbott testing and another testing process that we could use, and what we can't provide for here within 48 hours. Hopefully we could get between Anchorage and Fairbanks news as to what's happening. So through our big Alaska Native Health Consortium, the ANMC Hospital, we're fortunate to be able to check with accuracy for those that are positive. So today we're going to be getting more details on this. And I mean, Saturday was a blow, and now we'll get another one, and possibly a bunch of people because of the funeral that took place there at Chignik Lake. So it is happening now. It's real. It's not what we wanted. The nightmare begins for many people thinking back to when they lost their whole families. And the genesis of our hospital was an orphanage. And the orphanage was some of the kids that were surviving barely. And there's horrid stories about the 1918-19 flu that decimated almost all our villages. So we're down to roughly 30 villages from well over 100 in times past. And the Russians were here, and there's a recorded history of all these places that are no longer there. And God forbid we get from bad to worse, but we'll do our best to hold it in check. And we're going to have to quarantine that area, and that may be cutting off the Chignik fishery down there. I don't know. But up here, we have at least one so far, and we're starting to do tests, and we'll probably find more.
And when you say at least one so far, are you referring to a fisherman or a member of the native peoples?
The one in Chignik, we believe, is a local person. We all are fishermen in some respects, subsistence or otherwise. In Dillingham, it is a Trident Seafood, international company that sells fish, and they try to do it right. They did quarantine all this, but that person tested positive, and we shipped him out on a special plane into Anchorage so he could be taken care of over there. There was 5 other people that were with him. We believe they're okay, at least for now, but with the false negatives, you're never totally sure without further testing later. And these people were asymptomatic, which is scary, because if you got the symptoms like here, I've got to go through temperature checks and this, that, and the other, and all that stuff there. It's just like TSA security. If they had that in Anchorage, if they had that in Seattle, and they have it here in Dillingham, then you have better assurances and you catch the problems. We're getting it a little too late, and it's better before it is too late, obviously. But that was precisely our problem and issue we've had with the government. They're just not really responding, and it's kind of again late, as I keep saying, and that's the frustration when you could have prevented it maybe early on or limited it. And that's what we want to do, is if we can't stop it, try to limit it, try to control
and
it.
the last clarifying question was, you had mentioned 16 hospital beds. Now, is that within the walls of your hospital, or does that also include the more rural clinics in your area?
Our rural clinics do not have beds. There's a small community health center over in Naknek. There's a small one in Iliamna, and one in Chignik and in Togiak. They don't have beds. They have a mid-level practitioner, nurse practitioner, or PA. The others have community health aides that are certificated people, but they're not licensed. And we're the only hospital in the 40,000 square mile area with 16 beds, 12 of which can take care of this area. A couple are for people that have mental health or alcohol problems, DTs, this, that, and the other, under security control, and a couple are for women with babies.
So that's truly 12 beds
Yes.
for 15,000 people coming in.
Yeah, exactly. You got it. And that's the thing. We're just outgunned, or we're outclassed. We just can't take care of it. In a typical year, when you don't have a pandemic, a cut, a bruise, a broken leg, a sprain, things like that would happen from fishing, we can take care of. But we cannot take care of people when we don't have the ICU and the beds. We got oxygen, but we don't have all the ventilators and stuff that one would really need if you were sick enough. Now, not everybody gets to that level. If you're isolated, and we have an isolation place downtown, a former nursing home, 20-bed facility that we could send people to and keep in isolation, and generally they'll be okay. I mean, we see the statistics, but others will die, and others really need the extra level of care, which is only in Anchorage. It's not in Bristol Bay.
Fascinating. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Is there any other question?
I would just maybe say one.
Let me just ask one more question, if I may.
Okay.
And then I'll let you final word, Mr. Barnes, if you don't mind. One more question to Mr. Clark. What happens if the COVID-19 breaks out on a fisherman boat? I mean, are you prepared for that? Will you allow the boat to come back to the port? And how long do these fishermen boats stay out on the sea before coming back? Mr. Clark, did you get the question?
Okay, there I am unmuted.
Okay.
Maybe out fishing for 24 hours or 7 days a week. It depends on the flow and the ability of the cannery to take care of the fish to keep it pristine and nice. That's what we're doing. We have chilled fish, iced fish, and stuff like that. So the canneries can only take care of so much. It's regulated by Fish and Game so that you don't have an oversupply and spoilage. So it could be 24 hours to 5 to 7 days. So when you get sick on a boat, you have to come to shore. It's a dock. So that means people are going to be around, and we have the only boat harbor in Dillingham. Then you have to take a car 6 miles out to the hospital to get tested. And then you have to, once you know for sure it's positive, you get down to the airport, another 4 miles down, and then you take off from there. And it'll probably have to be a medevac, and it has to be isolated, and it can't be a regular flight. So we have 3 days a week commercial flights to Dillingham. That's all we have. For about a month or more, we didn't have any. We were just simply charters, and charters are very expensive. It's a private airplane with 6 to 9 people aboard. So you get them to Anchorage and you get them to the bigger hospitals to take care of it. We're limited here, and we do a good job, and we take care of lots of stuff. But as a critical access hospital, we're not big level 1 trauma center.
The other fishermen on the boat, will they be on quarantine automatically, or
they would have to be all quarantined? Again, you might have anywhere from 2 to 3 people up to 10 people on a boat, because some of these boats are very big and high tech. And believe it or not, a 32-foot boat with engines that could go 60 miles an hour, $1 million boat. I mean,
thank you very much for these for those complementary explanations. I think the situation seems the elements of the situation seem very clear. Mr. Barnes, I'll let you perhaps the final word, or any other speaker. But Mr. Barnes, the floor is yours for the wrap up.
Okay. I'd like to see if anyone else has anything to say before I wrap up.
Well, we appreciate the international ability to share our word. We've been trying it in the state. Our villages did all the resolutions early enough where something could have been done more proactively by our state government and our federal government. And the federal government has provided COVID monies throughout the United States to try to help. It's never enough when you have a big problem. So we're very thankful for that. We're thankful for this ability to share what Ronnie and folks have been trying for years, giving us an ear to the international and national and everybody, so that government to government, domestic nation that we are, we have something more than just, you're okay, we'll take care of you. And I get 47 cents on the dollar. That's all I get from the government. I have to earn the rest of the money and then some to survive here. This is their facility, and we're supposed to be a ward type relationship to the government. They're never taking care of us. And while this helps, it helps everybody, and it's still clearly not enough. So our voice would be helpful. Anything that the international UN or anybody could do to help there, and talk to the folks in the United States, and talk to the folks up here in Alaska, and our tribal governments need to really feel like they're doing something. The municipalities have a place. It is what it is. We're a 280 state, and I guess we're a conquered people, but we still should have a voice, and an important voice in our day-to-day activities.
Thank you, Robert.
Yeah.
Here's what we are doing here, and to the extent that we can draw attention to international special procedures here, which are the independent experts and special rapporteurs of the Human Rights Council, perhaps opening communication directly with the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, and maybe getting some states to put in their resolutions for the next Human Rights Council, if it functions in June, to give attention to us in resolutions, and to actually have some of these special procedures visit Alaska and other indigenous communities so that they can report on the inequalities that we experience and the lack of resource, the lack of medical equipment, and then to also assert our right to sovereign equality. And that's the best we can do with some of the special procedures and experts. We sometimes have to lobby and find those who are brave enough to take on the United States, those so that they will give us the conclusions and recommendations that we can pressure states and also local governing authorities to act on. So we will continue this. Of course, it's good to work with our people locally in Alaska and Bristol Bay, and we will continue to do so. And so we thank Geneva Press Club and all of those who are viewing, and we ask for support from the international community, from member states, and to put in the extra effort, because in order for us to deal with this COVID-19, we need help, we need due diligence, we need experts who are not afraid to put the pressure and to make the statements that may draw some action or reaction from states. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barnes. Thank you, Mrs. Mills. Thank you, Mr. Stromer, and especially also Mr. Clark, who is with us from Alaska, from the Bay Area. I think you made it very clearly your point. I wish you to stay safe, all of you, and thank you for being here and making the case. And I think we can wrap it up, this press conference now. Thanks also to our audience that followed this conference on the different our different channels, YouTube, Facebook, and our internet site, pressclub.ch. I wish you a good day, a good evening for the other ones, and have a good day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very